All right, everyone. Oh, some of you already been in the chat. That's wonderful. Welcome, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. I know we will have a lot more people who signed up joining in as we go on. So we've got people from Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Amherst, Pittsburgh, Boone, North Carolina, Alberta. Hey, there's a Canadian. Good job. More from Pennsylvania and the United Kingdom. Annette from the United Kingdom. Wonderful. Yes, please feel free to drop your name and where you're from in the chat. That's what it's there for. If you have a question or a comment at any time for myself or my colleague, Daniel Greenberg, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump in. We're a little casual around here, so you don't want to miss anybody. And so this will be recorded, and we look forward to talking with everyone today. So just to get us started, my name is Karen McBride, and I am president and founder of Bound International. We're a company that launched a year ago that seeks to bridge the somewhat divide, I guess you could say, between study abroad and international programming and the sustainability profession in higher education by putting forth a number of programs, products, and services that really address the climate crisis in tandem with study abroad programming and international academic mobility. And I'll let my colleague, Daniel Greenberg, introduce himself really quickly before we get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Greenberg. I've been involved in sustainability and study abroad probably at least for 25 years. I worked with UMass Amherst and started a nonprofit called Living Roots, and we ran study abroad programs in Ecovillages around the world. And I'll mention a little bit more about that a little bit later. And I also had the privilege of chairing a number of committees for NAPSA and ASHE, which, if you don't know, is the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. Sorry. And I guess my main organization, well, there's two. One is called CAPE, which helps create custom academic programs in eco-villages, and Earth Deeds, which is an alternative to carbon offsetting, which I'll also share more about in a few minutes. Nice to be with you all.
All right, good job. Thank you very much. And we're on our way. So the first thing we're going to do, very quick and simple. I know a lot of you have done a number of these, but we're going to do just a quick poll here for just about a minute or so. So you should see this pop up on your screen. Just want to get an idea of who we have with us today. And if you don't see the poll or are having some issues, please do let me know.
While people are answering that, I just also want to mention that I unfortunately double booked today, so I'll have to leave probably at 35 or 40 after the hour. But I think we'll get through the main presentation by then.
Yeah, so for those of you that teach, you know the routine.
Fortunately, I was able to get some friend to help with the beginning of it. So.
All right. We'll give it just another minute or so. I know some people are still coming in, so they got to catch up a little bit.
Interesting that I guess that makes sense that everyone here so far is a study abroad professional and not so much in the sustainability field per se. So we're looking from study abroad to sustainability. Often I do the other way around. I go to sustainability conference and I try to talk to people about study abroad.
All right, we'll be about maybe about 30 more seconds. All right, so it looks like a lot of study abroad professionals here today. There are some sustainability initiatives going on in your study abroad office. For some, there aren't, or you're not sure. Yeah, if there are sustainability initiatives, looks like it's pretty varied. Office procedures, sustainability or green themed programs, SDG mapping, carbon offsetting, revised policies. I think the revised travel policies is going to be the hardest one to tackle in my experience for those of you working on college campuses and having that discussion across campus. And pretty varied in terms of what you most need for the office. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I'll just quickly put these up, if you can see these okay. This is kind of a snapshot of who we have here today. So we're going to be talking about a lot of these things, and also about some things that that we can certainly offer as well to try and assist those of you looking for very specific things in your place of work. Okay. All right, so onwards. So one of the reasons, the main reason we're here today, the main reason our company exists, the main reason we're doing a lot of these initiatives is that we are really facing an existential crisis. And for those of you, I know many of you like me who've been working in study abroad maybe for many, many years. I've worked in study abroad for about 16 and a half years. Prior to founding this company, I was Director of Education Abroad and Partnerships at the University of Dayton in Ohio. So I've spent 16 and a half years spending most of my time sending US students abroad and hosting exchange students, but also hosting scholars, international students, dual degree students, and onboarding them to a US campus. So many of us probably in our field don't have these hard science or life science backgrounds to us. They're in counseling or international affairs or languages. So, part of what we want to talk about with everybody, and also thinking about our students, is how do we talk about this 21st century issue? Clearly, we have, an event going on called global warming. That's where we have just a natural warming of the planet because of the fossil fuels we are emitting on a daily basis. That is essentially providing a kind of a cover or a trap in our atmosphere, not allowing a lot of that natural heat from escaping as it normally does. And that warms the planet. And that does have some very broad and vast consequences. Weather patterns, wind patterns, we have more precipitation taking place, more water evaporation taking place in our oceans, and that starts to affect all of our ecosystems and our way of life. So these are just kind of a list of some of those issues, and it's something that has been going on probably since the dawn of time, but certainly when the industrial era started, it really started to accelerate. And then we have seen a lot more warming and a lot more of these effects becoming visible and having more impact on human and ecological life within the past 20 years. I think maybe of the top 10 hottest years on the planet, temperature wise, they have taken place within the past about 15 to 20 years. So this is a very real issue, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can talk about this in your office, but also with your students. So we start here with study abroad, because study abroad is an international academic experience. For those of us that work in the field, which seems like most of us here today, we know what these benefits are to students. It's something that really enhances a lot of their skills. It makes them job ready. It prepares them to be better citizens here in the 21st century. But we also know that it's been kind of an exclusive enterprise. There has been, some access issues, some cost issues, and certainly in the past year, access turned into literally not being able to get on a plane or obtain a visa or travel because of the pandemic. But this is still what I would consider one of the most worthwhile travel endeavors that can exist on the planet. When you think of people who travel professionally, or take a lot of vacations or other forms of travel, if you were to kind of categorize and rank the importance of the types of travel that do exist, I myself would argue that being able to travel as a student of some kind in your career, whether it's college or high school, or graduate programming, or maybe even Fulbright for professional development in academia, this is certainly one of those worthwhile endeavors. So these are just kind of a reminder of some of those skills that our students develop when they are able to study abroad, and they're skills that have been identified by employers as being what they need entering into the workforce. And I know that these are also skills that are coveted even by governments, including the one here in the United States, because it's a great way to proliferate what we call soft power, building those friendships, meeting people in person, and developing a lot of partnerships that's going to help us later on as we coordinate together as a planet, which we will definitely have to do on the climate crisis. And just to recap, I know a lot of you working in study abroad have your own stories to share. Your numbers are maybe coming in, or you've already taken a peek and it's not very pretty. And what we're going to see here is not, not going to be a surprise. But I went ahead and took some figures from my alma mater, at least my undergraduate degree at the University of Texas, which is one of the largest senders of study abroad students in the country. And so we are dealing with this impact of COVID, how travel essentially came to almost a full stop a year ago. And it will take a while for our students to get back on planes and to travel here, to travel there, whatever direction that they are going. And I think now is the time that people are thinking about building back better. We are becoming more conscious of the climate crisis. So as we're trying to increase our study abroad activity, once again, this is one of those issues that we need to be thinking about and incorporating into our study abroad programming and our approach to recruiting students and working with partners. So just some quick figures there. In 2018 and 19, the University of Texas sent about 4,700 students abroad in the United States. They are the third largest sender of study abroad students in the country. And then, just a year later, that dropped down to 1,700. And I'm not even sure if they are ranking anybody yet, because it's kind of what's the point. And this is coming from the global office, UT's global office, their information that they released in their annual report recently. And so what you're seeing there is a dramatic drop. We know that this is something that a lot of study abroad offices are facing. And it probably also represents the fact that summer was essentially shut down last year. And we know that about 60% of American students who study abroad, at least, are going in the summer, or at least a large percentage of that 60% who do short term. So I think that reflects that here. So does study abroad harm the environment? I'm not sure if a lot of you are getting asked this question, if it's coming up in its own way on campus, if it's something you maybe see in a thought piece on LinkedIn, if it's, just something you're reading about here and there. But this is going to be one of those questions that, in my experience, when I was at my last university, the University of Dayton, it did come up. And no one was really prepared to tackle it. Our chief environmental officer acknowledged that it's something we needed to look into, but he was open to partnership. In our office, who'd been trained largely in the liberal arts and humanities, we're not quite sure how to talk about this topic just yet, other than what we could read about the crisis online. So I'll just show a quick clip here. A couple of the resources that our organization has to offer are some videos that your office can use. So we have some pre-departure videos and re-entry videos that are 25 minutes or less that students could watch on their own time with the membership, which we'll talk about in a moment. And the pre-departure video basically addresses the fact that they are getting ready to embark on a study abroad experience. And what is the climate crisis? Is it harming the environment? What am I supposed to do as a study abroad student if I'm concerned about this? What are actions I can take while I'm abroad? And then the re-entry video, which we won't have a demo of here today, which will be available later this summer, also talks about how they can pivot from their experience, not just in terms of pursuing a career after study abroad, but how do they live more sustainably, and how do they be an advocate after what they've experienced abroad. So we'll just play this quick clip here for everybody. Again, this is just a quick 1-minute clip from our re-entry video that we provide to our professional and our student members later this summer.
How might a study abroad program contribute to the climate crisis? Travel is a significant contributor to climate change. As we mentioned, an overwhelming majority of travel that takes place worldwide is by plane, car, and train. All of these travel methods burn fuel, which contribute heavily to carbon emissions. It is estimated that air travel contributes anywhere from 2 to 4% of CO2 emissions per year alone. But transportation may contribute to at least 25% of annual greenhouse gas emissions when this is added to emissions from gasoline-powered vehicles and coal-powered trains. Whether you are from Germany, planning on studying in Italy, or from China, planning to study in Canada, these travel methods are used. Ultimately, travel to and from your study abroad destination, particularly by airplane, represents the vast majority of your environmental footprint.
So again, that's just a quick clip of something from our pre-departure video. If you're thinking about how do we talk to our study abroad students about the climate crisis and their desire to study abroad, the video also helps prepare them get ready to travel with a more sustainable lens. And we do try to answer these questions, or at least bring up how study abroad may harm the environment, as well as cultural influences on the climate crisis. So what are some strategies that campuses are taking? We just listed a few here based on our coordination we've had with campuses, what we're reading online as well, and how we're networking with various study abroad organizations and universities. There's certainly sustainability education, pre-departure, on-site, and re-entry. People are already thinking about how do we increase this eco-literacy amongst our students. Environmentally themed courses, programs, and research. Several of you answered in the poll that you are you have these types of programs, or you're creating more. Many of you are looking at incorporating the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, into your curriculum broadly across campus, but also in study abroad programs. Looking at your travel policies, who gets to travel, where, and why. Those will be interesting discussions on campus for sure. I have been on those committees before. Carbon accounting, strategic partnerships, maybe locally or abroad, and also local actions. So what we're also going to reference here today is what can you use to provide to students now? Because a lot of these efforts will take work and coordination, we know, within your organizations, committees, working groups. There's going to be a lot of feedback, a lot of buy-in. There's going to have to be approvals. There's going to be processes that are put forth. But some of you are thinking, well, what can we do right now for our students? And since students only have 3 or 4 years as part of their undergraduate degree, they can't really wait for us to eventually figure this out over the next 2, 3, 4, and 5 years. That is certainly the long game. But what do we do for the short game here? So I'll turn it over to my colleague here, Daniel, who will talk about one of the things that we do offer in partnership with Earth Deeds, which is carbon onsetting.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so as I mentioned, since 1995, I've been taking students to what are called ecovillages, which are essentially communities that are striving to live high quality lifestyles with low ecological footprints. So how do we live well and lightly, which to me is the essential question of our generation, of our time. And these were amazing programs. I continue to think of ecovillages as amazing campuses for students to really learn about sustainability, that we create learning communities within living communities. But as you can imagine, there was a core dilemma right from the beginning. I mean, here we were, an organization all about sustainability, and yet what were we doing? We were flying students all over the world, emitting megatons of carbon dioxide. So from the beginning, I figured we had to do something. We had to figure our carbon emissions and do something about them. So you can go to the next slide. So I looked around, and what we did is we measured the carbon emissions of each flight, and then we set a price for those emissions. At that time, there was no good recommendations or guidance of how to do that. So we used what's called the voluntary carbon market. It was around $15 a metric ton. And then we just put it into the tuition, and then it went into a pot. So each program had a pot of money that was meant to somehow account for, acknowledge the unavoidable emissions from the travel. And the question was what to do with that money. And I looked at the main game in town, which is voluntary carbon market. Many of you have heard of some of these, TerraPass, Native Energy, et cetera. And the more I looked into it, the more challenged I felt. And so to look at some of the issues here, with offsetting, where you're basically paying a company to do something, plant trees, efficiency projects, whatever, and they're measuring a reduction in emissions, and then through your payment, they're making the claim that you have now reduced the same amount of emissions as you generated, and so you can claim to be carbon neutral. Great idea in theory, but there's a lot of challenges. It's a very inefficient way to transfer funds to projects. Some estimated as much as 70% of the money that you give to an offsetting company actually stays with the company. So only 30% actually gets to the actual project. You may know back in the 16th century, the Catholic Church talked about indulgences, where you could pay the church to absolve you of sins. And many think of carbon offsetting similarly, that you're basically buying a clean conscience while delaying any meaningful action. The pricing is very weird. It's volatile, changes all the time. It's not based on anything scientific. And then there's this big issue of additionality, which is if I'm going to pay a company to offset my emissions, I want to make sure that that's actually happening in addition or because of the money that I spent. And the problem is that a lot of these projects would have happened anyway. And if that's the case, then they're not really offsetting anything. And also, many of these projects are huge and non-local and really don't have any meaning to the students. And for us, taking students to Ecovillages, the biggest issue was like, why would we give money to a company that's going to invest in some project, even if they do what they say they're doing, but it has no connection to us when there are all these great projects right in front of us in these Ecovillages? And so I kind of banged my head against the wall for a number of years. And I finally realized, like, you know what? All these problems are having to do with the concept of carbon neutrality. If we drop that idea, then basically what we're left with is more of a pricing mechanism, which is what most countries and a lot of municipalities are doing. The idea of pricing carbon is gaining momentum around the world. And it's similar in that we're saying, yes, we absolutely need to measure our emissions. And of course, we need to reduce them as much as we can. But then let's price those emissions based on the best scientific evidence of what it costs to put a ton of carbon into the atmosphere. Right now, I would say that's something called the social cost of carbon, which I can go into if people have questions. But currently it's around $45 or $50 a metric ton. And then let's take that money and put it toward projects that we think are actually creating the world we want. And ideally for study abroad, those are projects based in the communities where the students are studying. So by doing this, it's more efficient because there isn't all these middlemen that are needed to create this concept of carbon neutrality. It creates a pay it forward story. It's science-based. It can support existing projects in addition to new projects, small local projects based in the communities where students are. And it has a lot of pedagogical meaning. And it actually asks the question that I think begs to be asked, which is, what do we think is the best thing we can do to create a better world? It may be planting trees or doing something that has a measurable carbon mitigation value, but it could also be something around local food or social justice, climate justice, right? These are all things that we can't even approach in the carbon offsetting world. So it really opens our mind to thinking about not just mitigation, but also adaptation. So with our partnership with Bound, you can go to the next slide, we've created a method that if you're interested in this, it could apply to the students that you're working with. Oh. So Earth Deeds is, so I left Living Roots back in 2012 because I felt a strong urgency around climate change. And so I created this site, which essentially gives online tools for people, and in my mind, especially study abroad organizations, to price their emissions and account for them. So as you can see, this would be a team page, and we could create team pages for a university, for an individual program. It's all possible. You can barely see, but there's various projects that you can say that this team is connected with, and you can actually create a lot of sub-teams. But what I really want to show you is if you, well, okay, well, you can, well, yeah, go to the onset emissions now, and I'll just show you the calculator. So here we put in 3 projects, but again, this is up to you. We have something called the Climate Change Leadership Institute, 350.org, which I suspect many of you have awareness of, and then the Climate Web, which is really cool. I encourage you to check that out. And then scroll down. And do you want to just put something in? Karen, you can just
yeah, so
like.
we saw some people from Massachusetts here today. So we'll do Boston to Beijing.
Let's just do that in round trip, and yeah, okay. That's a big trip. And you can see you can change the type of flights, and then if you want to put in any ground travel.
If students maybe think they're going to travel about 100 miles by train, which in China is very possible, or maybe about 50 miles by bus, and then we click calculate emissions here. Okay.
And so now scroll down, you can see the emissions. So that flight is about 5.6 metric tons, whereas the ground travel was almost 0. So my sense is like 95 to 99% of a program's impact, at least its carbon impact, comes through the international flights. And then what's cool is if you scroll down, you can see what that means in other terms. So that amount of emissions is about 1,700 hours talking on your cell phone. What is that? I'm looking at over 500,000 plastic supermarket bags, et cetera. And you can see that it's about the average annual emissions of someone living in Spain. And then depending on where you're coming and going to, it shows you those as well. So it's 92%. That one flight is 92% of an average annual emissions of someone living in China, but only 3%, a third of someone living in the USA, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you go down further, there's a number of things you can do. It shows you what that is in the social cost of carbon. So you can do this a number of ways. Students can pay, you can build it into the tuition. They can actually crowdfund as well to say, hey, I'm going on this trip, I'm trying to make it carbon conscious. I can put in X amount, but I'm trying to raise this amount for these really good projects. And we also don't even have to do it with payment. It can be just saved so that the information is there. And then you get to aggregate that data. So the students actually see what the overall emissions of their program is. So it takes a little bit more work. It's a lot easier just to send a check to TerraPass, but I feel like it has a lot of pedagogical value. And there's also videos that I have that the students could watch around climate change. In fact, what I double booked, I have to go to a class that I'm actually doing on climate change. So there's lots of information we can share around that. But I hope that gives you a basic sense of what that system could look like. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important points was the last one there is this is a learning opportunity for students rather than teaching them that to donate some funds or to send a check or to do some calculations or have it rolled into their program fee without them even realizing the cost. Why don't you make them active participants in these calculations and have those discussions prior to travel as well. So this is a great educational opportunity. So what is our membership program at Bound International? We have a membership program that is available to students as well as professionals. And so if you're a professional, if you're a study abroad advisor or study abroad director, there are a number of things that you can get with our membership program. We'll show those just in a moment. And if you are a student member, if you are traveling individually and you don't know if your home university or provider has a membership with us or you would like one, there is an opportunity for students who are more independent travelers to partake in some of these resources as well. And this membership program will launch later this summer. We're finishing building out the portal, so that will be available very soon. And we'll talk about how to be mindful of that a little bit later on. But once somebody logs into their membership portal, that's what it looked like on our website. And so once you log in as a professional member, this is the page that you will effectively see. And these are the things that you will get as part of your membership. So the carbon onsetting, access to that site, to coordinating with us to work on whether you want to carbon onset one particular program, maybe one type of program, your faculty-led programs, or maybe all of your programs. We can work with you one-on-one on making that happen and determining what projects you would like to utilize and how to get your students more actively involved. The videos that I referenced a little bit earlier, these pre-departure videos that students can watch at their leisure, or you can show at pre-departure or re-entry orientations that are less than 25 minutes long that help frame their experience in terms of the climate crisis and where they'll be going, and also cultural impact on the climate crisis. How do cultures, because of our cultural tendencies, contribute to the crisis, and how do they also approach solutions from a very cultural lens as well? We'll have destination reports. We're starting out with about 17 or 18 countries. These are the most studied and traveled to countries in the world, including the United States and Canada, where the students are reading up on their destinations. They should be reading up on them in terms of sustainability as well, not food and the culture, but also how is the crisis affecting the country that they're getting ready to travel to? How is this country responding to those things? That's what will be in those reports. We will have sample curricula for people to use that we created for our COIL professors, which is Collaborative Online International Learning, assignments based on topic as a way to kind of sneak in some sustainability-oriented assignments and exercises into their courses, and they could apply to study abroad programs as well, and a certificate of achievement program, which we'll go into more detail in just a moment. So here's just a quick, very quick look of how this will look online. If you're traveling, if you have students traveling to Australia and they click on the Australia destination report, what does that look like? The main aspect of the Australia page are these categories here. So as a student's preparing to travel, we will provide information about Australia in terms of the cultural and political influences that they are having on the climate crisis or towards climate solutions, unique geography and species of Australia, including endemic species, indicator species, endangered species, key issues. What are the things most affecting Australia right now with regards to the climate crisis? And you can see there's a picture there of an eel and some heavily bleached coral. Coral bleaching is a unique issue in Australia that maybe inhabitants of Canada are not necessarily experiencing, although they might be. And then what is that national action? What is the legislation being put forth? How are political parties responding to the crisis or framing it in their own way? And it's meant to be very nonpartisan. It's just what's part of their platform. How is Australia doing on the SDG index and their SDG indicators? And what are sustainable travel tips if you're going to Australia? What's the best way to travel to and within that country to be a more mindful traveler? These are some of the things that students and as well as professionals will also get as part of their membership. And the curriculum, we're starting with these topics as well. We have some COIL faculty on our program that are teaching peace studies, English composition, political science, finance and economics, and they too are not necessarily climate change experts. So how do we empower them to put forth some assignments that help students accomplish their learning goals on these topics that are environmentally oriented or oriented around the crisis? So we are putting those together, and we will continue to have a lot more of those over time. And then one thing that students will get that professionals do not within their membership is an advocacy guide. So as many of you know, working in study abroad, we're very good at pre-departure orientations. We're maybe not as good as engaging students once they're on site, because let's face it, once students leave, we've got to move on to the next group that we're recruiting and preparing to leave. And then, we're kind of hit and miss on the reentry activity and reentry courses and programs. So, but we know that a lot of the magic really happens, that solidification of the experience, the framing of it, the molding of it really happens during the reentry process. So for students who have studied abroad, once they come back, as part of their membership that they could have with us, in addition to the videos and destination reports, is an advocacy guide. So what did they see while they were abroad? Did they have discussions with their host country nationals while they were abroad on this topic? Were they seeing news stories come up about political parties or legislation or protests happening, and they were able to frame it a little bit better? So once they come back, how can they live more sustainably? How can they travel more sustainably? What are some of those outlets that they immediately have at their disposal that their study abroad experience really influenced them to do? So that's a self-assessment. Where do you want to get started? Where do your talents lie? Maybe SMART goals to help you arrange your thoughts, writing and self-expression, if that's a way that works for you, creating a blog, writing for a local paper, and then political advocacy. How do you get involved once you get home? And not all countries are democracies. Not all countries have congressional leaders or members of parliament. So wherever you live, how do you take those next steps is what we have available for students. And then here we have our certificate of achievement.
Yeah, I'll take it from there. So this is an exciting initiative that we'll be rolling out in the next few months. Those of you who are aware of sustainability initiatives at your school are probably aware of STARS, which is it comes out of ASHE, and it stands for the Sustainability Tracking and Rating System. And it's a great way for schools to look at where they stand in terms of sustainability, and it gives them a bit of a roadmap of where to go. Sadly, it doesn't really include much around international travel or even off-campus study. And so we're really looking at how to create a certificate of achievement that's focusing on international education. And so we're going to start with a survey, and many of us have been thinking about this for decades. And so there's actually a lot that you can do. And we're going to see what people have been doing or what they might think about doing. And then it's going to be developed into a certificate of achievement where first you become a professional member with Bound International, and then there's a consultation with Karen or me, and then there's the survey, but at that point it'll be more involved, also with a resource guide that can support you looking at how you can actually move forward with it. And this idea of a roadmap, I think, is really important. So it's looking kind of at a baseline, and then where do we want to go, and help you prioritize what actions you could be taking, and then a follow-up appointment, and you can publish your rating. So in my mind, it's really mostly about like, well, how do we actually do the work? But of course, it's nice to have some sort of certificate that you can promote and say, look, this is where we are. Right now, we're looking mostly in terms of office management and promotion, student learning, and also really looking at on-site and program design. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just to reiterate or just to mention that these steps here, these ratings and this imagery may not remain the same, but this is to give you an idea of what we're looking to do. We will be coordinating a sustainable education abroad sort of state of the field survey for the entire field later in the summer. And then this survey will be open to anybody. It will be targeted specifically to maybe directors of study abroad offices, people that have a lot of detailed information about programming, but also policy, strategy, initiatives, training. So most likely it'll be somebody who manages the study abroad programs. But for those that are members with us and would like to do the certificate of achievement, we will actually take a look at your own survey and maybe go into a little bit more depth to help you kind of understand where are those benchmarks you should be setting for yourself. What are those insertion points? What are you doing well in? What do you need assistance with? What are some strategies you can take to make your study abroad office more sustainable? So it's very specialized in that way. And again, those ratings listed here to the right in those colored globes, the imagery and the ratings themselves might change a little bit, but this is the overall concept as to how to help your office kind of advance, and also compare yourself to other offices as well and see how the field in general is doing. So we intentionally wanted to end it a little bit early so that you could have some questions. Again, we will be releasing or announcing the launch of our member program, in which all of these resources will be available to study abroad offices. And for students, they will have access within their membership to the videos, the destination reports, and the advocacy guide. And then the study abroad office will have access to the carbon onsetting and certificate of achievement and COIL curricula as well. That will be announced probably later in the summer. And if you would like to be a part of our newsletter, then you can just contact us and we will happily add you to that. You'll probably get a first look at some of these things as they come out. We've already been doing that for those of you that are on our newsletter list. You get kind of sneak peeks. But we also want to just pause here and just see if anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts about anything that we can answer for you. And feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in, or if you'd like to raise your hand, or if you feel more comfortable putting something in the chat, we can check that as well.
And I can hang around for one or a couple questions. So if there's anything in particular about carbon onsetting or the certificate program, I'd be happy to respond to those in particular.
Yeah, if you have any questions about those in particular, maybe we can start there.
Daniel, I did have a question for you. I can't do video, but maybe you can hear my voice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm most familiar with the ecological footprint calculator on footprintcalculator.org, and it looks at diet and transportation and all sorts of habits in daily life, not just the flight to a study abroad destination and then the transportation on site. And so I wanted to know, in your opinion, how you decided what was in your footprint calculator and how that plays into, like, it can get really overwhelming for students to be tracking everything. And so how do you guide them to, and just sort of that social emotional transition to seeing their impact on the earth as well?
Right. Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, the ecological footprint calculator is great, and it's quite broad, and it's kind of never ending. I really was focusing on carbon. And because I feel like that's the majority of the impacts of study abroad, and it's something that we should be thinking about and something we might be able to do something about. So that's why I included in flights and travel primarily. There are modules that you can add to the calculator around accommodations and other types of fuel. We didn't add one around food because it's just so complex, thinking about the carbon impact of food. Maybe that's something that we would include in the future. But if someone or an organization wants to look more broadly, then I think something like the ecological footprint calculator would be a good resource as well. So they actually are fairly complementary. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, you know, when you think about accommodations, utility usage abroad, and food, it does get a lot more complex. You know, if you have the luxury of working with the same housing provider over and over again, where you have utility bills and you can do good estimates, but we all know that those fluctuate over time. And then food, the eating habits of students, and you know, where they're purchasing or acquiring that food at a grocery store, at a market, at a restaurant. It would be a lot more complicated, I think, to calculate, even though it is absolutely relevant. And I think what Daniel is saying too is that, you know, you've got to figure that about 90 to 95% of the harmful emissions that come with study abroad are in the flight in and of itself. And so that's a good place to start. And that's why we have that there. But our calculator could accommodate those other things as well, if we choose to look at that over time. And it looks like Chrissy has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to be sure and ask Daniel a question before he has to hop off. I'm pretty new to all this, and I've started some talks with our sustainability office about the idea of carbon offsetting our student travel. And gosh, I thought I was so progressive in thinking about that. Now I'm thinking about carbon onsetting, but we had a student intern who did some calculations for us, and he discovered that according to his calculations, it would be about $15 per student to offset their carbon emissions just for plane travel. And so then I was looking at your calculator on Earth Feeds, and it looks like that there's a big price difference between that. Do you have a sense for why that might be so different?
Yeah, well, first, you're from App State, right? I mean,
Yes.
You're doing some great stuff down there, so good on you. The voluntary carbon market, as I said, is a fairly volatile market, and it basically will charge for emission or for mitigation what people are willing to pay. And the social cost of carbon is a different way of looking at it. It's actually saying, let's think about the cost of emissions based on sea level rise and decline in agriculture, increased disease rates, even decreased tourism, all of these things. It took over a year with about 12 agencies of the US government to come up with an estimate, and it's ever evolving. So it's just a very different way of looking at it. And I would actually be surprised if you could even offset a flight, any significant flight for $15, because it's usually about $15 a ton. And if you're flying overseas, it's going to be at least a couple tons getting there, and then round trip, it's probably going to be at least 3 or 4. So its social cost of carbon is more, but I think it's actually a more realistic estimate. And many people say that it's actually a very low estimate. Some say a cost of a ton of carbon should be upwards of $200 to $300 or $400 per ton. And of course, this is going to increase as it becomes more urgent and the impacts become more clear. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, that does help.
Yeah, maybe these carbon markets as well, Chrissy, are, you know, kind of like those restaurants where, you know, pay what you can, which is great for a lot of reasons. It certainly makes it affordable. But again, it puts students in a very transactional mindset. If I pay $15, I don't have to feel bad about travel. When it really should be, they should be learning more about what it actually costs. And, you know, not just dollar amount, but, you know, it's impacting the people that you may or may not purchase things from, who live and work near the hotel or the neighborhood you're going to be in, the food that you purchase and eat and consume at local restaurants or grocery stores. They've got to think a little bit bigger. And then they need to be more involved in those calculations and to truly kind of feel like, wow, everything that I do has an effect and a ripple effect, right? There's putting carbon in the atmosphere, but then what that does, I think that social cost of carbon looks at that. What that does is it trickles down and affects this and affects that and affects this and affects that. And so is there a way to wrangle all of those details all at once by measuring absolutely everything? I would say that's a pretty tall order for anybody. If it took a year for 12 government agencies in the United States to think of this, you know, how are we asking study abroad students to do it? But that's that learning aspect of the carbon onsetting program, is how do we get students involved in this and at least let them know that these are some of the concepts you have to deal with. Just like when we send them abroad and they're going to be entering into another culture. Yes, you can tell them what language they speak in France, and yes, the majority religion in France, and generally they eat this and they eat that. but we know that it's not until students go that they enter into their own kind of experience, and it's hard to pre-plan that for them. It's just something that they've got to think about and try to learn to wrap their head around and realize all those complexities and that nuance. And I think that this is very, very similar. So there are some very actionable things we can do, some calculations and some education that we can do. But if we start to think, how do we measure absolutely everything, then we might be kind of chasing our tail or shooting ourselves in the foot trying to do that. But I definitely, I'm surprised too, $15. It sounds like one of those restaurants, pay what you can. Your meal might cost, you know, $50, but 15's okay. And then you got to think, well, so what impact am I actually having with $15? But that just to add to what Daniel said there.
Last call and
Last call for Daniel anyway.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Daniel.
Hope to be in communication again. Thanks, Karen. Take care.
Yeah. Off to class. Does anybody have any questions about the membership program and how it would work for your office? Or maybe some of you would like to share some of the things that you're actually doing that you think are working well, or that you're not sure if they are, that, you know, maybe we can share with the group and have a quick discussion here before the end of the session.
I have a question. This is Ine Williams.
Oh, hi, Ine. Yeah.
How are you doing? Yeah, I was really curious, as I'm hearing more about what people are doing. Are there ways that people are thinking about tying these projects that were just outlined to every aspect of, let's say, the study abroad experience? So, for example, if you're starting out with your application and you're learning about these, you have something that you can do locally if you choose to do so, that's either connected directly to one of the projects that were outlined on the page, or parallel to it or similar to it. So that essentially you have this kind of model that you're not just experiencing it online, you're not just experiencing it on site, you have it across every element of your experience. So that makes the re-entry piece provide you with a better way to potentially reflect on it. So it's not just that you only tie it to being abroad. Because I'm seeing sometimes a lot of the onsetting is when you're abroad, which is great, but then how do you also tie that into the local pieces, which may look very different or may have justice components that are very personal for people?
Yeah, good question. Anybody, for those of you who are thinking about the poll, for those of you that said that you are doing some things here and there, anybody have a response or some thoughts to Ine?
And that could tie into the classes that you talked about too, Karen. So I was thinking about it to that too, just if it's not something that people have been thinking about, how could it be infused in all those areas, from PDO to classes to whatever? Yeah.
Yeah. So it should be integrated, right? It kind of reminds me of when we all, about 20 years ago, for those of us that were maybe around about 20 years ago in the field, when we start talking about internationalization and how we need to incorporate international and global aspects into all of our courses, and don't just leave it to study abroad and international students to be the international component on campus. In a similar way, I think that should be going on now with sustainability education, eco-literacy, however you'd like to frame it on your campus, understanding the sustainable development goals. And it should be, I think, it should be from not only how the study abroad office is running and how they manage their office, but how they design programs at the outset, how they create and modify policies, travel policies or other. And then that's even before you even kind of market your programs and advise students. And as you market programs and recruit students, how do you also talk about this as well? And we've got to realize that students all over the world, right now that are in university or getting ready to be in university, are very, very conscious and concerned about this in ways that previous generations were not. The millennial generation, which are now, they're getting into their 30s or so, they were the first to really make this kind of a top 3 issue for them and their generation. If you look at studies about millennials, And then this Gen Z, Generation Z, it's probably the number one issue. So for those of us that have always been hesitant to talk about the climate crisis and everything, who thought, well, I don't have a degree in biology or physics, I'm too scared to get into this conversation because I don't really know what I'm doing. We need to actually kind of own up to that and speak to these students because they do want to know. So when you're marketing and recruiting them in those advising sessions or at fairs or in your materials or however you do it, maybe you decide to keep your virtual study abroad fair and you explain at the outset, one of the reasons is you're actually saving on, and you could calculate, on some admissions associated with our normal fair that's half the day and we get hundreds of students. Now there is a cost to actually using technology, which is the next thing that I think our field is going to look at. Using technology, it has a cost as well. But how do you openly talk about these things? Because students do want to know. And if we don't openly talk about it, they will bring it up. So how do we prepare ourselves to show the efforts we are making to say that international academic travel is just one of those experiences that we absolutely want every student and young person to have, whether that is physical study abroad or maybe it is COIL, developing peers and classmates from other countries using technology. That is the type of travel that we always need to support and advocate for. But you're also telling them we are conscious of this situation that we've gotten ourselves into. And here is how we are responding to things and showing what you're doing and being active about that rather than passive. And not just saying, well, we have 3 programs in our portfolio that look at sustainability in Finland and New Zealand, and so, we're good. Well, what about the students who still want to go to Italy to study art, or they want to go to South Africa to study political science? We still need to reach all of those students and have proper framing going on. And then all throughout their journey as well, what can we be doing? And certainly the reentry piece is, ask students, you thought about this before you left, but what did you see while you were abroad? Maybe you were in an island nation and you saw some things. Maybe you were in South Africa or Australia and it was pretty darn hot and you went to areas with extreme drought. What did you see and experience? Maybe you were in Paris or Chicago and you didn't really see anything because urban areas sometimes don't feel like they see that crisis in a more immediate way. Well, but it's still happening. So how do we help students kind of pivot off of their experience and become travel advocates, academic travel advocates, but also be better citizens in that way? So our materials can certainly help students do that through all those different phases. But I'm also wondering, and I think maybe Ine asked if there were others who had thought about this as well, that might want to share something too, with what you do before, during, after, or all 3. Does anyone have any, not quite sure? Maybe this is the not quite sure crowd, but
that's
and also while the camera's on, I'm not sure if someone's getting ready to speak, but that's okay.
Can you tell a little bit about membership, please?
Oh, sure. And I put this in the chat. So the membership program will be for 2 audiences. There will be a professional membership, which will be only $199 a year. And there will be a student membership, which will be $75. Students only pay $75 for the year to have access to the resources that we covered today. These resources are meant to be for any professional or study abroad student, no matter where they are in the world, no matter where they're going. So if you're, I know we have some Canadian professionals here and a British university, at least one of you is here. These are for your students as well. We do profile the United States, we profile Canada, and these are tips and tricks and things to think about and information that they need to know, regardless of where they're coming from and where they're going. So these are things that any office can use and for any student. And what the way it will work is once it launches later this summer, we'll be making a lot of big announcements in our newsletter and elsewhere. Probably all of you will see these come through on Sakusa and LinkedIn and whatnot. You can certainly follow Bound International on LinkedIn, where a lot of that information comes out quickly. But you would just go online and you would register, indicating whether you're a professional or you are a student. And then once you have acquired that, then you log in and have access to all of those materials for the following year. And we were very conscious of making this very affordable to not only professionals, but students. We know we have a lot of students who are doing a lot of things independently, and they don't always know or have access to what their office is doing to deliver resources. So we wanted to empower students by giving them a membership option. And then once you sign up and pay, then you have access to all of those materials for the year. And for the carbon onsetting and certificate of achievement, that will require some consultation and coordination with Daniel and I, since those will be, resources that go beyond what you can kind of access online. There will be some need for dialogue and some additional work to be done there. And I had somebody asked that earlier in the chat. Thank you very much. So I think we are pretty much at time. We will, I will be sending out, a follow-up to this webinar for everyone, including those that weren't able to attend or had to come in late. And we'll be sending everyone a recording of this webinar, and then I will send some information on how you can sign up to be a part of our newsletter. And then just stay posted on all of our usual channels for information. Again, following us on in LinkedIn or Instagram, or we even have a Facebook page for those of you that are actually working on Facebook. Not everybody is. We know young people are not on Facebook as much anymore. So we'll be sending all that information out shortly. And anytime you have any questions, whether it's you feel it's very technical or just broadly speaking, please don't hesitate to email Daniel and I. We are happy to work with you. We are working in partnership with each other, so we will work on this together with you. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. We really appreciate it, and we really look forward to working with all of you and providing great resources for you and your students. Have a great summer.